You know, over 100 years ago, the single most powerful economic institution in America was born, and it was born in complete and total secrecy. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the incredible story of how the Federal Reserve was created.
So let's start with a question. A real mystery. Why, back in the autumn of 1910, did some of the most powerful men in America, we're talking men who controlled a huge chunk of the nation's wealth, just disappear, vanish from the public eye with no one knowing where they were headed?
Well, it turns out their destination was a private exclusive island, way off the coast of Georgia, a place called Jekyll Island. And they weren't there for a vacation. No, they were there to tackle a problem so big, so dangerous, that it was threatening to rip the entire American economy to shreds over and over again.
Okay, so let's get into it. You've got to ask, why all the secrecy? Well, to get that, you first have to understand just how chaotic things were back then. The mess they were trying to contain was massive.
So here's the deal. For almost 80 years before 1913, the United States didn't have a central bank. Think about that. Individual banks were literally issuing their own money. The whole financial system was prone to these wild swings, constant bank runs, and just devastating crashes. It was the Wild West of finance.
And just look at this timeline. It's not just a list of dates. It's a pattern, a relentless, brutal cycle of financial disaster. You'd get a major panic, which would lead to a market crash, and then a soul-crushing depression. And this wasn't a rare event. No way. It was a recurring nightmare for the American economy.
I mean, get this. The system was so fragile that a major financial panic was hitting the country, on average, every 10 to 15 years. Just imagine trying to build a life, a business, or save for your family, knowing that at any moment, the whole system could just collapse and wipe out everything you've worked for. That was the reality. And then came the big one, the Panic of 1907. This was the straw that broke the camel's back. The whole system went into a complete freefall. And you know who saved the day? Not the government, one guy. The incredibly powerful banker, J.P. Morgan. He had to personally step in and organize a bailout to save the entire U.S. economy. When a private citizen has to bail out the country, you know the system isn't just cracked, it's fundamentally broken.
So, who were these guys? Who got the secret call to solve this massive national crisis? Who were the men chosen to meet in secret on Jekyll Island?
So here they are, the secret architects. And the level of secrecy here was incredible. They couldn't risk being seen together. So they all traveled separately, using only their first names, and met up at this obscure train station in New Jersey before making their way south. You had Senator Aldrich, the government guy. You had Paul Warburg, who was the expert on how European central banks worked. And then you had the absolute titans of Wall Street, guys from J.P. Morgan, National City Bank, all of them. Put them all in one room, and you're looking at an unprecedented concentration of financial power. And their mission? Well, it was a real tightrope walk. They had to design a central bank that wasn't totally controlled by Wall Street because, the public would never trust that. But it also couldn't be totally controlled by Washington politicians because that would be a recipe for instability. They had to find this perfect, delicate balance right in the middle.
Okay, so how did this top secret plan, cooked up on an island, become the law of the land? Because believe me, it did. It became the very blueprint for the financial system we have today. All right, let's look at what they were actually trying to build. Their plan had 5 main goals. Number 1, and this was the big one, financial stability. Just stop the panics. 2, it had to be a lender of last resort, a backstop to save banks during a crisis. 3, it needed to control the money supply to keep the currency stable. 4, it had to modernize how payments were made across the country. And 5, the really tricky part, it had to balance public and private power. That was the whole game.
So from that secret meeting on the island to becoming actual law, that whole journey took about 3 years. The plan from 1910 got debated and tweaked in Congress, and it eventually turned into the Federal Reserve Act. And then, right before Christmas in 1913, President Woodrow Wilson signed it into law. And just like that, the American financial landscape changed forever.
So let's jump to today. How is this plan, hatched over a century ago, still running the show? Well, it all comes down to the unique structure they came up with.
This right here, this is the core of that Jekyll Island Compromise. It's a hybrid system. On one hand, you've got public oversight. You have a board of governors in Washington, D.C., and they're appointed by the president, so they are accountable. But on the other hand, you have a private structure. There are 12 regional Fed banks scattered across the country, and they're actually owned by the private banks in their area. It's this intentional mix of public and private, designed for both accountability and political independence.
And this whole system really stands on three pillars. You've got the Board of Governors in Washington. They're kind of the strategists setting national policy. Then you have the 12 regional banks. They're the boots on the ground. And then there's the big one, the FOMC, the Federal Open Market Committee. That's a mix of both groups, and they're the ones who make those huge decisions on interest rates that you always hear about in the news.
So when you boil it all down, what does the Fed actually do today? Well, a huge chunk of it is monetary policy. That's managing interest rates to fight inflation and keep employment high. Then there's bank regulation, making sure the system stays safe. And yep, true to its origins, it's still the lender of last resort, and it still maintains our payment systems. You can see the DNA from that original Jekyll Island plan running through everything it does.
So think about this, a secret plan, forged over a century ago by a handful of powerful men on a remote island. How does that shape the money in your pocket today? Well, every time the Fed makes a decision on interest rates, every time they talk about inflation, they are directly impacting the value of every single dollar you earn, save, or spend. That secret meeting's legacy? It isn't just history. It is quite literally in your pocket right now.